Welcome to Zoom in China. I'm Simone Gao. Peter Schweizer is the co-founder and president of the Government Accountability. He's also the author of, among other books, Clinton Cash, Extortion, Throw Them All Out, and Architects of Ruin. His new book, RedHanded, reveals the elite capture of our country by the Chinese Communist regime. The White House, Capitol Hill, Silicon Valley, Wall Street, and diplomats are all targets, and the CCP has made major inroads in all these critical places. What exactly have they done? How did they do it? And what has to be done to counter it? I had these discussions and more with Mr. Schweizer. Thank you, Peter, for joining Zoom in China today.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so before we talk about your very popular new book, RedHanded, I would like to get your opinion on Ukraine, if that's okay.
Sure.
So Biden said he didn't know Putin's real intention. So, do you think Xi Jinping knew Putin's plan regarding Ukraine when he met Putin at the opening ceremony of the Beijing Olympics?
Yeah, I think it's highly likely. Obviously, Russia and China have had this historical animosity going back to the break within the communist world, and they are going to be rivals at some level. But I think we're seeing a new level of cooperation between them on energy matters, commerce, and I think also on geostrategic issues. So it would not surprise me if Vladimir Putin had, in a sense, told President Xi what his plans were, or at least what his goals were in the area. I don't think that's surprising, and I think we can expect these two powers to work in concert at some level to advance each other's interest at the expense of the West and the United States.
Okay. In that case, how strong do you think a Russia-China alliance would be? How long would it last?
I think it could be very potent for a couple of reasons. One of Beijing's chief weaknesses is the fact that they need to import so much of their energy because they don't have much domestic production. Russia could fill that gap. Russia is resource rich in lots of ways. So that's one area that they could cooperate. Russia would also benefit in this arrangement because, of course, China is a massive manufacturer. Russia needs access to manufactured goods. If there's a boycott by the Western powers of Russia because of its actions in Ukraine, it'd be very easy for China to fill that gap. I think it could be a very potent cooperative relationship. There's still going to be some suspicions, but you've got two leaders that are very ambitious, have very specific laid out plans and what they want to do, and I think they're prepared to help the other one achieve them.
Interesting. In that case, do you think the Russia-China alliance would set a new world order in which America's power and influence will be reduced?
I think that's certainly the goal. That has been Beijing's goal, I think, really since President Xi came to power. He's announced it. He's expressed it. He's been open about it. Vladimir Putin, of course, his power is really on the decline. Russia's not the power it was even 15, 20 years ago. It continues because of demographic reasons and its economy to be struggling. But I think they're happy to be on what they would perceive to be the winning side and the side that is trying to rework the world order. So I think they could be successful as long as the United States and the West continue to demonstrate poor leadership in the face of Beijing's challenge.
Right. And talking about poor leadership, let's talk about your new book, RedHanded. Tell me, what is it about and why did you decide to write this book?
Well, the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, has a very, I would say, brilliant strategy to deal with the United States and other countries. And that strategy is called elite capture. And it's pretty simple. Instead of going head to head with the United States, with its dynamic economy, with its world-class military, with its cultural reach around the world, what Beijing has decided is they're going to effectively lobotomize America's leadership by buying off the political class, people on Wall Street, people in Silicon Valley, so that they will kind of mute the response that the United States has to Beijing's aggressions. And in some cases, these people that are subject to elite capture will actually be helping, aiding and abetting Beijing in its competition with the United States. So that's the strategy. It's working very, very well. And unless we take some serious action, it's only going to get worse, and we will lose this competition with Beijing.
Mm. When you talk about buy off US elites, what are you talking about exactly? Just using, money to buy them off?
Yeah, it's really providing commercial opportunities for political families in the United States, whether it's the Bidens, the Bush family, or the Trudeau family of Canada, and there are many others. They provide lucrative sweetheart deals. Hunter Biden, of course, it's well known that he secured a number of deals in China. As I point out in the book, he's received some $31 million in deals, and he clearly was not qualified for. Those were arranged by 4 businessmen, all of which have ties to the highest levels of Chinese intelligence. And the goal here is to capture the family, in a sense, make them beholden, gain leverage over that political family. And they've been quite successful at doing it. For some people, it's the lure simply of the money. For other people, Beijing appeals to their sense of importance, their sense of being able to reshape the world. So for somebody like Bill Gates, the founder of Microsoft, who already has a lot of money in itself is not an appeal. But if he's told that he can help rework the health system of the planet by working with Beijing, that's an appeal to his ego, and one that works very, very effectively, and is another example of how elite capture would work.
Right, right. Can you give us some highlights of the book? I know you talked about the Biden family, the Capitol Hill, Wall Street, Silicon Valley diplomats. Can you give us some of the highlights of the book?
Sure. If you look at Washington, D.C., you've got a situation where I think the president of the United States and his family have benefited from lucrative deals in China. We know that these were not just Hunter Biden deals, that Joe Biden himself benefited from those deals, because while Hunter was securing them in Beijing, he was also paying some of his father's bills, paying for renovations on his home in Delaware and elsewhere. But it doesn't just begin and end with the Bidens. If you look at Capitol Hill, Mitch McConnell and his family, Elaine Chao's family, have benefited mightily from sweetheart deals from the Chinese State Shipbuilding Corporation, which has helped grow the family business enormously. We know that if you look at Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, she actually was quite good on China when it came to issues of human rights. But then her husband and her son started securing deals in Beijing, and she became noticeably softer, which is where she is today. You could look at Senator Dianne Feinstein of California, the fact that her husband, Richard Blum, was given hundreds of millions of dollars of deals in mainland China. Many of them were groundbreaking deals that nobody else has. This is a problem that goes on and on and on and on. And a lot of political Washington became wealthy courtesy of these deals. And now they are reluctant to call Beijing out on its aggressive behavior. If you move to Wall Street or Silicon Valley, it's basically the same way. You have companies like BlackRock and Blackstone that do a lot of business in China. They are loath to criticize Beijing for anything that they might do. They make over-the-top, exaggerated claims of how wonderful and benevolent the Chinese dictatorship is. It's really quite an appalling record. And I think it's something that the American people are just waking up to, how extensive it is. And I think it's also something that needs to be exposed, and these people need to be shamed for the things that they're saying and the things that they're doing.
Right, right. You mentioned in the Silicon Valley chapter that the reason for these Silicon Valley tycoons to court the CCP is for data. They need Chinese data to develop a better AI. Do you think they have got what they wanted from China? For example, despite Zuckerberg's effort, Facebook is still banned in China. And with Xi Jinping's new direction of cracking down on Chinese e-commerce tycoons, the big Chinese players are struggling to survive. Do you think that will have an impact on how Silicon Valley deals with China?
I think China will always be sort of the big white whale of the Moby Dick novel. It will be the one that they will always pursue and chase. So somebody like Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook, you're absolutely right. Facebook is not allowed in China. They're not going to allow that level of free speech. But Mark Zuckerberg continues to try to do things that will benefit Beijing and that will somehow get him in their good graces. As I point out in the book, in 2016, he funded, along with the founders of Google, this underwater cable that was going to link Hong Kong with San Francisco and allow there to be the uninhibited transfer of information between the two cities. The FBI and the Department of Justice looked at this and shut it down in 2019, saying that this project would provide unprecedented spying on Americans by the Chinese intelligence service. And part of the reason for that was the company that was putting the cable together for Facebook and Google was a Chinese military contractor. So you have to ask yourself, Simone, was this a surprise to Mark Zuckerberg? Did the guys at the FBI and Department of Justice uncover something that Mark Zuckerberg didn't know? I really doubt it. I think he knew from the beginning that this was going to create these security problems for Americans and this benefit for Chinese intelligence. I think he just didn't care because he can't help himself. He wants to continue to try to get access into the Chinese market one way or the other, even if he gets rejected. And the problem is that mindset is not just limited to him. It's pretty widespread.
I'm always curious about this. I mean, you can kind of understand if they don't care about national security, but in the long run, if they do business like that in China with the Chinese Communist Party, they're not going to be the winner in the long run. And don't they realize that the Chinese Communist Party would not let them, ultimately win? I mean, compete with their own companies and win. I mean, defeat their own companies.
No, I think that's a brilliant point because the explanation, the rationale they always provide is, yes, we understand there are these other concerns, but we're a company. We have to create shareholder value. This is all about building the company. And as you quite point out, any of these technology companies that have done business in China have their technology stolen, have the Chinese government subsidize competitors, and they end up losing every single time. It's always hard to know what's going on in the minds of these individuals, but these are not dumb people. I mean, they built these businesses. They're very tech savvy. They've got to see what has happened to so many of these other companies that have tried to do this. You look at what happened to Cisco Systems, where they went over there, they offered cut rate products to Beijing. They were selling products that were $50,000 in the United States to $10,000 for the Chinese government. And what did the Chinese government do? They subsidized and incubated a competitor to provide the exact same product that Cisco was offering. And you hear that over and over again. So it is a fool's errand, and it's a mistake they continue to make. It's not only damaging to them as a company in the medium to long term, it's damaging to us as a country as well because of the national security implications we've been talking about.
Right. Maybe they are just so short-sighted. I mean, they don't think about medium to long-term benefit. If they're the CEO of the company, I can understand that. If they're the owner of the company, I just don't quite understand that.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I mean, this is a complaint of American business, right? That they're always think about quarterly profits rather than something more long term. And I think certainly that is part of the problem here. And I think the CCP is taking advantage of that.
Right. But what do you think the American elite's opinion on Xi Jinping? Will Xi Jinping interrupt their China game plan?
I don't think so. I mean, it's interesting when he came to power, and I quote several of them in the book, they all operated under the assumption that he was going to liberalize China, that he has this personal history with his father and that his father was imprisoned. And that led everybody to conclude that he was going to liberalize Beijing and China. And of course, the opposite has happened. Right now, there seems to be a lot of healthy respect for him. People like Bill Gates will say that President Xi worked so hard on behalf of the Chinese people. When COVID broke out in China, of course, there was a massive cover-up. A lot of that was reported at Epoch Times and elsewhere about doctors that were raising questions were disappeared. Bill Gates ignores all that, and he says that the response to COVID by Xi and the Chinese government was as close to perfect as you can get. which is a ridiculous statement to make. So no, I think a lot of them are seeking the deals in China. I think, Simone, another factor at work here is some of them are clearly enamored with the fact that the Chinese dictatorship can get things done more efficiently than you can get done in the United States. And obviously, when you have a system that doesn't really recognize civil rights or property rights, where you don't have an independent judiciary, you don't have an independent legislature, you have no competing political parties, it's very easy to get things done. And so you find them making statements about how efficient the Chinese leadership is, how effective they are at getting things done. So it's about more than money. I think some of them are actually enamored with the dictatorial nature of that regime.
You know, another question that has fascinated me recently is George Soros' opinion on Xi Jinping. He has attacked Xi Jinping on major Western, media, multiple articles, one after another. But isn't he a globalist, the same as Bill Gates and those sort? Why do they hold drastically different opinion on Xi Jinping?
It's a great question. It's hard to know, obviously, with George Soros, what he's thinking and why he's doing what he's doing. It may just be sincerely that he recognizes Beijing as a threat and wants to call it out. Another possible explanation is if you look back to the 1998 financial crisis, you remember there was a massive move by Soros to cash in on the currency crisis in Asia. One of the actions the Beijing government did was aggressively defend Hong Kong's currency, which ended up costing George Soros a lot of money. So it could also be sour grapes, right? He's just angry that Beijing cost him a lot of money. It's hard, it's impossible to know. My view is that we're going to have strange bedfellows, but if people recognize the threat from Beijing for what it is, what it's doing to its own people and the threat it represents to us, and they're willing to be outspoken about it, I'm thankful that they are. And I want to think that they're genuine in what their motivations are.
I just want to know, how much power does George Soros hold in the left-wing political circle in America? I mean, he said open society will do everything they can to prevent Xi Jinping from ruining China, to hopefully get a new guy, more open-minded, reform-minded guy to be the leader of China. I mean, how serious should we take that remark?
Well, again, I want to take him at his word, and I hope that is the motive that he has, and it's a pure motive. I think the ability to do that as a nonprofit organization is somewhat limited. I think what has to happen is this consensus that has been dominating American foreign policy for so long, that if we just have free trade, if we have free access to our capital markets and free access to our technology, the Beijing regime is going to liberalize. They're going to become more like us. We've been saying that for 30 years, and it's simply not true. Xi is far more repressive, more aggressive than I think his recent predecessors were. So we have to change the consensus. And I think what we have to do in this country and other countries is get serious about recognizing that the nature of the Beijing regime not only is horrible to the people of China, but it also represents an existential threat to us. Ronald Reagan made this point during the Cold War that our enemy was the Kremlin, it was not the Russian people. And because of the nature of the Soviet regime, it would continue to represent a threat until it became more liberal and less repressive towards its own people. I think the same thing applies to China today. So it's really going to take government action. And as long as we effectively subsidize the Xi regime, give him access to all of these things with no cost, and as long as the Chinese economy continues to grow the way it has, he's not going to face too many internal problems. At least that's my view. At least it's not going to reach a tipping point where his regime would be in trouble. So I think it's great if George Soros is going to do that. But I do think it's going to take a whole lot more from governments in order to meet this challenge and reform and help reform the government in China.
So there's an interesting debate about whether it's a good thing or not to keep Xi Jinping in this position for another 2 terms, like another 10 years or even 15 years. Because if you think about what Xi Jinping has done to the world, if Xi Jinping continues on this path, closing up China, going on the ideologically more like a Maoist path, the Western world will depart from China. There will be a separation from the Western world and China, and that's probably good for the free world because you won't be you won't be corrupted by the Chinese Communist Party anymore. And on the other hand, for the Chinese people, if Xi Jinping continues on this path, many Chinese people think this cannot last. They will crash the Chinese economy and all that. I mean, the Chinese people will suffer a short-term loss and pain, but in the long run, Xi Jinping is probably the person that will really bring down the Communist Party, which will be a great thing. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think that's a very intriguing thesis. What I would say is it's really a race in a way, right? If that is true, and I think you can certainly make that compelling case, the question is, will Chinese communism collapse before we see the effective capitulation of our leadership to Beijing? It's a race as to which one is going to happen first, and I don't know the answer to that question. What I would say is I hope that that's correct. I hope that President Xi, with his aggressively going after entrepreneurs and some businessmen in China, is going to severely damage the economy. I hope that has the negative effect that we think it's going to have. But I don't think we should count on that. I don't think our strategy should be to just sit back, keep doing things the way that we're doing, and hope that his grand experiment, his aggressive actions fail. I think we should, in a sense, make clear that the policies that he's carrying out, the aggressive actions that he's taken, are not going to be rewarded and accepted by us, that we're not going to allow meddling in our country, and that we're going to effectively cut him off. That could potentially help precipitate the collapse of the Xi regime. But I wouldn't want to bank just on the hope of what Xi's future means for the rest of the world. I think the prudent approach and strategy would be for us to take actions to precipitate that kind of a situation.
Yeah. Let's talk about the impact of American politics. Will a shift of the political wind in the United States change how these American elites deal with China? For example, will presidential or midterm elections change things?
I think maybe a little bit on the margins, but the core problem remains, because if the Republicans take power in the House and maybe in the U.S. Senate, you still have the fact that there are powerful Republicans and powerful Republican donors that want business as usual with Beijing. I think what we need to see is an awakening in this country to the extent of the problem that we have, that elite capture is real, that it's not going away, that it's a peril to our country, and come up with a consensus on that, and then with a series of policy actions. But I don't think we should count on one political party or the other simply doing it without pressure. Because the problem is, Simone, there is simply too much money to be made by kowtowing to Beijing, and there are too many people willing to do it. And those are powerful incentives that are well understood in Washington, D.C.
Then where is the hope? The hope lies in the people, awakening of the people?
Yes, the hope lies in the people waking up. We do know that politicians want to keep their jobs. They want to be reelected. They want to remain in Washington, D.C. If this becomes a vital issue for voters, it will change the equation. If we start enacting reforms and laws that penalize this kind of behavior, it will have a very real effect. But I feel like we are just now, over the last year or so, we've started to awaken to what is going on, the threat that Beijing represents to us, that the human rights abuses that are occurring in that country are not just about terrible activities taking place halfway around the world. It's a reflection of this regime and the plans that it has for us. That's awakening that's taken place, and I hope the book plays a small role in helping moving that forward and proposing the kinds of changes we need to make.
I bet. When you talked about there's awakening going on in this country, are you talking about just among average people or also among the elites?
I think a little bit of both. I think the elites were unaware of what some of their colleagues were doing. And in the book, I bring it into relief how Nancy Pelosi's positions have changed, for example, after her family started securing deals in mainland China. I think a lot of people didn't realize the evolution of her views over the last 20 years. I think among Republicans, there's been a lot of surprise about the commercial ties that Mitch McConnell and the Chow family have in mainland China. So I think the awakening's happening both places. I think with the American people, it's been more dramatic. And I think in a sense, it's more important because I still do believe that the elites in Washington do have to respond when the people awaken. They do have to respond. And we've seen a change in U.S. policy to China really beginning with the election of Donald Trump. He really threw out the old playbook that wasn't working, the notion that free trade and free technology was going to liberalize the Beijing regime. That has all changed, and I see this as a cumulative series of steps that are moving us in the right direction.
Right. Thank you, Peter. And these are all my questions. Do you have anything else to add?
No, that's great. Thank you. I enjoyed it very much. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. Thank you for joining Zooming in China today.
All right.
That's all for today. Thanks for watching Zooming in China. Please like, share, subscribe, and donate to this channel if you like my content. Also, head over to my membership website at zoomingin.tv. You can get video audio formats of my shows, full transcript, and in-depth reports available only to members. Just $5 a month or $50 a year, and you can cancel anytime. Please check it out.